Hi everybody, and welcome to the Shane Plays first look slash first thoughts of the basic D&D rules that dropped on July 3rd, yesterday. This is the free version of D&D 5th edition, although they're just referring to it as D&D. So a lot of people have been excited about this. They're kind of offering, it's a subset of the rules, but it's a fully playable version of D&D 5th edition, which once again they're just referring to as D&D. So this here that we're looking at is a piece of artwork. Enjoy it, because it's the only piece of artwork in the entire set at this point. So I'll come back to that here in a second. Let me go up to the very top. And this is the first page, the logo, etc. I'd like to mention at this point that there is a companion post to this video on my shaneplays.com website that goes also into my thoughts, has the links to download both the rules and the character sheets, has some thoughts, etc. And then it has a photo gallery of snippets that I took from the, what in the heck? Don't worry about that. I guess I need to fix that. I don't know what happened. Anyway, there's a nice little photo gallery that you can look at. So anyway, and don't go there to view your arrest record. I have limited control over the ads. So another thing I'd like to point out, D20 Monkey, Brian Effin Patterson, at D20 Monkey on Twitter, has already printed out his stuff and got it in a binder and tabbed and all this stuff. So that's my kind of enthusiastic role player. I personally have not printed them out yet. I don't know if I will. I've gotten more comfortable over the years just doing stuff electronically, but I might. I do print some stuff out. So back to the rules. Here's my thoughts. First of all, I have to say this is cool. This is very cool. The rules are there. There's a lot to them. I think there's like 100 pages. However, there's more rules releasing in August when the hard copy Player's Handbook comes out. And at that point, there'll be more like adventures, monsters, Dungeon Master rules, that sort of thing. And if by some chance you don't have experience with role-playing games or Dungeons and Dragons, the DM or another game, the GM, the Game Master, or the Dungeon Master is sort of the referee, the storyteller, the adversary, and you kind of have to have those rules for the game. But if you're really imaginative, or you're just, kind of adventurous, no pun intended, you want to jump in, or you have experience with role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons, these rules will keep you going until August. And there's also a boxed starter set that is releasing July 15th that has a lot more, I think it has a prepackaged adventure and some Dungeon Master rules. So if you just absolutely can't wait, you can buy the starter set July 15th. And I think there's a few game stores that have it already, but I don't quite know what's up there. This I found really funny. This was a nice little touch. This disclaimer that they put in here, and it says, disclaimer: Wizards of the Coast is not responsible for the consequences of splitting up the party, sticking appendages in the mouth of a leering green devil face, accepting a dinner invitation from bugbears, storming the feast hall of a hill giant steading, angering a dragon of any variety, or saying yes when the DM asks, "Are you really sure?" So that was a nice little touch. I got to give it to them. Just, snarky little thing in there if you're paying attention. And the play testing, there was only over 175,000 fans help play test this, and that's neat. So give credit where credit's due. Here's your people that were behind the scenes making this happen. Some of these guys have been following on Twitter, and I've been watching like some Dungeons and Dragons channel videos on YouTube, so I've kind of gotten to know who some of these guys are. Mike Merles, Rodney Thompson, Chris Sims, of course Christopher Perkins here. He's kind of a well-known dungeon master, and then Greg Bilsland was the producer. So, and there's a whole lot of other names here. Everybody worked hard. I'm sure those are just some sort of names that jump out at me that I recognize. So, again, this is available for download at DungeonsandDragons.com, and the links will be in the notes to this video and also on that blog post, which will be linked in the video notes as well. So let's kind of take a look here real quick. I'll point out some things that kind of jumped out at me. Here's your typical introduction to what is role playing, and how to use the rules, what kind of dice. So this is kind of the typical, if you have no clue what you're doing about role-playing games, read this. I'm assuming that you probably know, but if you don't, go read it. And also here's a nice touch. They mention right off the bat Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance. Dragonlance is probably my favorite Dungeons and Dragons setting, other than just quote-unquote generic fantasy. Greyhawk, Dark Sun, Mystara, Eberron. So it's nice that they're mentioning that right off the bat. So I like that. And there's some quotes in here. I think in the very beginning, in the beginning play example, it talks about Castle Ravenloft. If you know Dungeons and Dragons, Ravenloft is a classic setting. There's a quote in here from Dragonlance. So first we go to create a character. I don't know. I wish Adobe didn't do this, but every time I jump to a new section using the bookmarks, it resets the size, which is kind of annoying, but anyway. So what they do is they kind of go through this Bruenner guy. This dude named Bob is building a dwarf named Bruenner. So that's kind of the example they use. Your typical ability scores are there: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. I've heard, I haven't actually seen this in the rules yet, I'm sure it's there, that the saving throws are now based on all 6 ability scores. So some people were saying, oh yeah, that's cool, now there's a charisma save. So there you go. This rule set also includes a quick build. It says each class description in Chapter 3 includes a section offering suggestions to quickly build a character of that class, including how to assign your highest ability scores, background suitable to the class, and starting spells, etc. So if somebody just wants to jump right in, this stuff here is pretty typical D&D role playing. Your strength, dexterity, what races get what bonuses, etc. Alignment made the cut. We still have alignment. But they get into these ideals, bonds, flaws, and background, which, now I'm not familiar with D&D 4th edition. I've played 1st a lot, played a little bit of 2nd, played quite a bit of 3rd. I didn't play any 4th, and now here I am basically looking at 5th, and the ideals, bonds, and flaws, and then background is, I guess, sort of an official rule, is new to me as far as Dungeons and Dragons goes. So maybe that came from 4th, I don't know. Getting into, here's how all to bring it together for your character. You'll notice here that you can go up to 20th level in the basic rules. That's pretty cool, because back in the day, in the 80s, when you had like the basic set and the expert set, and you weren't even playing advanced Dungeons and Dragons, I think the basic set took you to like level 3 or something. So free rules that get you up to level 20. That's pretty neat. let's see here. Races. The races that you can play are dwarf, elf, halfling, and human. And there's some sub races of those, but that's it. There's, if you're going to play the regular D&D rules, I'm sure that there's other options. We don't see half orc here. We don't see. I know in D&D of recent years, you've had like tieflings, and you've had what do they call it? Dragonborn, or where you kind of have dragon blood. There's none of that in here. This is pretty basic meat and potatoes, Dungeons and Dragons. So what's kind of neat though is, you get at the beginning of each section, you get kind of a quote, kind of explaining what that race is. This one is using Bruenor Battlehammer from the Crystal Shard, R.A. Salvatore's book, to kind of explain a dwarf. Kind of gives some good background here on dwarves. And then this is kind of neat. It kind of shows how dwarves look at other races. So, and they do that for each race. Gives you some example names, etc., sub-race, etc. So that's kind of the races. For classes, and once again, let me adjust the size here. I don't know why it does this. You have the cleric, warrior, rogue, which I still think of as a thief from back in the day, but a rogue, and a wizard, which back in the day, of course, was a magic user. So got that kind of a overview of what they can do, their primary abilities, their hit dice. Hit dice, of course, is relates to hit points. And then you get a kind of a description of the class. You get the quick build. You get the class features, the advancement table. Up to 20. All the various things for the cleric, etc. So, and once again, you got your 4 basic classes. I'm sure in the regular D&D rules that you will have more classes. So let's jump to personality and background. And name, sex, height, weight, make it random if you want, etc. Alignment. One thing I'll point out here, I've seen some people kind of like, hey, thanks Dungeons and Dragons for doing this. It says you don't need to be confined to binary. And I have a cat. My cats are fussing at each other. You don't need to be confined to binary notions of sex and gender. The elf god Corlon Lorethian is often seen as androgynous or hermaphroditic, for example. And some elves in the multiverse are made in Corlon's image. You could also play a female character who presents herself as a man who feels trapped in a female body, or a bearded female dwarf who hates being mistaken for a male. Likewise, your character's sexual orientation is for you to decide. That's so darn open-minded and progressive and politically correct. It just makes me want to puke. Sorry, but do you really have to put that in there? I mean, it's a role-playing game. People can play it how they want. So it's like they're going out of their way to say, here's how open-minded we are. So if you want to play, your character that way, or anyway, that's fine. That's up to you. But I don't need Wizards of the Coast encouragement or permission to do that. It's like there's a whole lot of other rules they could have done the same thing, but they narrowed in on the sex and gender because that's such a politically charged thing in our current culture. It just kind of bugs me a little bit. I'm sure other people love it. More power to them. But it's just like, hey, look how cool we are. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Kind of bugs me a little bit. There's other people who will love it, and that's their call and their decision. So, and then we get this sort of Tika and Artemis. They take a couple of existing characters from Um, one from the Dragonlance setting and another one from the Forgotten Realms setting, and they kind of contrast them. Kind of say, hey, look, they're both fighters with a little bit of experience as rogues, but here's how they're completely different, showing how the background makes a difference. So that, that's good. I do like here that the alignment system has kept itself in Dungeons and Dragons, all the way from lawful good down to chaotic evil. And I'd like to point out that much to what some people would say, lawful good doesn't necessarily have to be lawful stupid. It can make for some interesting situations in role playing. And I think that the alignment system does add depth to both the game and the characters. I also think that true neutral is a little bit of a cop-out. If you're going to just say, I'm neutral, I'm completely, totally neutral, because then you're just like, I can do whatever I want, and that's not interesting to me personally. But anyway, so alignment has made the cut. I keep kind of expecting it to get phased out of D&D because some people are like, well, no, we don't use it, or da 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 da, and it's but it sticks around, and I'm glad. I like the system. This I like this inspiration rule. And this is basically when you play your character in a way that's true to their personality traits, their ideal, their bonds, their flaws, which once again are rules in the game. The DM can reward you with, I guess you basically get an inspiration. You can't add them up; they don't stack. You get an inspiration, and you can use it by spending it. Say, hey, I'm gonna spend my inspiration, and you get an advantage on a roll, like an attack roll, saving throw, ability check. So I like that. And here's the ideals it's talking about here: things you believe in, your fundamental moral and ethical principles. Bonds represent a character's connection to people, places, events in the world. And then flaws, of course, are vice, compulsions, fears, or weaknesses, etc. So I like that kind of thing. I mean, if somebody wants to chunk it out because they just want to hack and slash, or they want to role play, ROLL play versus role play, ROLE play, that's fine. Different groups want different things. But if you do want to role play, ROLE play, these are great rules, in my opinion. So, and then you get these backgrounds. And I think these are sort of example backgrounds, but each class gets one. The cleric, has this sample acolyte with all these, suggested this and that, and some random rolls you can do here for your bonds and flaws and ideals. The rogue gets criminal as an example. You got the folk hero. I'm actually not sure what class this applies to. I guess a warrior, I don't know. A sage, probably a wizard, and a soldier, once again a warrior. So I just think that's kind of neat. Equipment, I'm not going to spend much time on this. It's, real typical to role-playing. Not a lot new here. Depending on your character, you get starting money. It gives you the exchange rates for the different kinds of money. Hey, electrums in there. People usually focus on copper, silver, gold, and I've always kind of liked the electrum and platinum and all that. How to sell treasure, armor, da 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 da. How long does it take to get into out armor? So this stuff's pretty basic. I don't think, just kind of looking at it, that a whole lot has changed here. I was glad to see that the 50-foot rope made it in to the adventuring gear. 10-foot pole made it in there, so we can all breathe easier. 50-foot of rope. You can either have hempen or silk. These arcane focuses, druidic focuses, fishing tackle. Just this kind of hodgepodge of equipment. Caltrops. Hey, always handy to have caltrops. Throw them down there and into the dungeon when people are chasing you, or if you just want to set a trap for people to yell out so you know they're coming. Gets into mounts and vehicles and etc. I'm going to skip ahead to customization options. So, you got multi-classing, feats, gets in experience points, all that. And like this, it's like, oh, a lot of this stuff says see Chapter 6 of the Player's Handbook for more information. Well, we don't have the Player's Handbook, so you're just going to have to wing it there if you want to play the basic rules and nothing but the basic rules. Okay, now we're into playing the game. This is actually more into how to play the game using your ability scores. I'm going to assume, for the sake of time, that you probably know how this stuff works. And I haven't gone through these with a fine-tooth comb, but it looks pretty standard. So, constitution checks, wisdom checks, etc. Saving throws. And I heard somebody mention that you can use charisma for a saving throw. I don't see that yet, but I've looked because I thought that was kind of neat, but maybe the other rules, the starter set or something, mentions that, because I haven't seen it here. But I guess maybe if you had two very charismatic people trying to win the day in a conversation or something, I don't know, maybe they, or somebody was trying to persuade you, you could say, well, I have a high charisma, let me use that. I don't know. Adventuring. So standard rules for movement, time, activity while traveling, splitting up the party. They actually put a box in here on splitting up the party. Conventional wisdom in role-playing, especially Dungeons and Dragons, is never, ever, 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 ever split the party. Conversely, at some time or another, everyone will pretty much always split the party. So I like to do it sometimes just to put a little mustard on it. Say, oh, let's split the party. Falling damage, social interaction, food and water, etc. So none of this. Now and I think they kind of introduced this in 4th edition. I think so. I've listened to a few podcasts of 4th edition gameplay from what was it? Critical Hits. I think it's a Major Spoilers podcast, but they have a 4th edition podcast called Critical Hits, and it's I heard this short rest kind of rule there, so I'm assuming it's for 4th edition. But you can do a short rest for 1 hour and kind of get some stuff back, or you can do a long rest and get a more traditional healing or restoration and that sort of thing. So between adventures, lifestyle expenses, downtime activities, etc. This is once again pretty standard. Now we're into combat. I haven't, like I said, read this with a fine-tooth comb, but I have kind of gone through it and looked, and it seems pretty standard Dungeons and Dragons style combat. Now one thing, and I don't know if I've already moved past that point or not, but they do point out that using like a map or a grid-based system with miniatures is now a variant rule, and that was interesting to me because that's been pretty core to D&D for a long time. Even if people didn't use them, I think it was kind of assumed that people were. But now it's it's talking about variant, playing on a grid. If you play out of combat using a square grid in miniatures, follow these rules. So here's this here, and I just found that interesting. They made that a variant rule. So, because in the past, and I could be wrong, but it's always kind of been like the grid in miniatures is kind of like the rule, and the variant would be to play without them. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Making an attack, melee attacks, Talks about rolling 1 or a 20. Um, rolling a 20 automatically succeeds or hits. Rolling a 1 automatically misses. They do have attacks of opportunity. I guess if you're not using a grid or miniatures to know where everybody's at, that you could just kind of gotta figure it out the best you can. If you're using a grid, I guess it's more straightforward. They introduced into Dungeons and Dragons attacks of opportunity in 3rd edition. It was kind of a controversial rule. Some people really liked them, some people didn't. I kind of liked the idea. So it adds another piece of depth to the combat, and that's one of the things about the turn-based tactical combat of D&D is one of the things I like about it. So I'm glad that opportunity attacks are still in there. Damage rolls. Okay, so critical hits. The way they're doing critical hits in this is when you score a critical hit, you get to roll extra dice for the attack's damage against the target. Roll all of the attack's damage dice twice and add them together. Then add any relevant modifiers as normal. So you don't get to multiply your modifiers, just the dice. For example, if you score a critical hit with a dagger, roll 2d4 for the damage rather than 1d4. Then add your relevant, etc. If the attack involves other damage dice, such as from the rogue sneak attack, you roll those twice as well. I still don't understand what makes a critical hit. I'm going to go back up here to where it talks about rolling. Sometimes Fate, where it talks about rolling a 1 or a 20, says, in addition, the attack is a critical hit. Okay, so it's not, it might be a critical hit. It is. So if you roll a 20, it's an automatic hit and it's a critical hit. I've heard some other rules. I think maybe Pathfinder does this, where if you roll a 20, it's a hit, but then you have to do another roll to determine if it's critical. And I've always personally, house rule or whatever, it's just a 20 is a critical hit. So it seems like how they're doing it here. I don't see a critical fumble, which I like critical fumbles. I kind of like if you roll a 1 that, something bad happens other than just missing. But, I don't see those rules here. I'm sure people will do house rules if they want. In fact, the natural 20 and the critical hits, and I think that all started as house rules, if I remember right. Wasn't part of the basic rules or the core rules. So here's the different types of damage. I don't remember thunder being a kind of damage. Perhaps it is, or perhaps it already was. But that's talking about like kind of shockwave, burst of sound damage. But you got, your lightning damage, fire damage, force damage, piercing damage, bludgeoning, slashing, etc. Dropping to 0 hit points. It's basically. Now here's. When you drop to 0 hit points, you either die outright or fall unconscious. So, if damage reduces you to 0 hit points and fails to kill you, you fall unconscious. This unconsciousness ends if you regain any hit points. So, instant death says massive damage can kill you instantly. When damage reduces you to 0 hit points and there's damage remaining, you die if the remaining damage equals or exceeds your hit point maximum. That's nasty. So you used to just be like, oh, you're at 0. And they had this sort of negative 10 hit points and you were dead. But now it's if the negative equals your hit point maximum. Got your death saving throws. If you take any damage while you have 0 hit points, you suffer a death saving throw failure. If the damage is from a critical hit, you suffer 2 failures instead. If the damage equals or exceeds your hit point maximum, you suffer instant death. So that's a little bit different to me. Not way out of control different, but perhaps that was from 4th edition. I don't remember that being from 3rd. Spells, could spend a lot of time on this, but I'll basically just say they have, they go into spells, they go into cantrips, they go into rituals. If it's a ritual, it can be cast following the normal rules for spell casting, or the spell can be cast as a ritual. The ritual version of the spell takes 10 minutes longer to cast than normal, but it doesn't expend a spell slot. So I think if you take the time, if I'm reading this right, if a spell can be a ritual, then you don't have to have pre-memorized it. You don't have to use up a spell slot or any. You can just cast it, but it takes 10 minutes. So the main thing I'll point out in here is you have spells for both divine, which is basically clerics, and arcane, which is wizards, up to 9th level. And according to a Twitter post from Greg Bilsland that I saw, there's around 120 spells. So, you know, free rules, 120 spells up to 9th level, not bad. So, you know, I could spend a lot of time going through here and pointing out, oh, I love this spell, or da-da-da, but I'll move forward for the sake of time, because there's a lot of real estate in these rules dedicated to the spells, as it should be. I will say that one of my favorite all-time spells is Magic Missile, which is in here, and this flavor or version, you get 3 off the bat, and then if you cast it at a higher spell slot, you get some extra ones, which is a little bit different from what I remember or I'm used to, but it's still pretty cool, and they still automatically hit. And then we have this appendix, which is the conditions: blinded, paralyzed, petrified, poisoned, prone, grappled, incapacitated, exhausted, etc. And then you get some character sheets, or a character sheet, which comes in 3 pages. And then you get the final page. What comes next? And let me point out, I mentioned the artwork earlier. This is the only piece of artwork, if you don't count the logo on the home or on the first page, title page. This is the only piece of artwork in the entire basic rules. Now, let's be clear, these are free. So, I mean, you know, what are you going to do? Complain? I'm not complaining. I'm happy to have the free rules. I just want to point out, part of the fun and the excitement and the draw of looking through rules for our role-playing games is the artwork. And if you're wanting to, you know, if you haven't played Dungeons & Dragons for a while, or you've never played it, and the point of these free rules is to get people playing. So I print it out, or I take it over to a friend's house, or I send them the PDF. You know, I think it would help to have more artwork, because they're like, oh, that's really cool, and they, you know, they keep flipping, or, well, yeah, okay, this is neat. So I do think these rules could have benefited from more artwork. That being said, it's free and it's cool. So it's a minor kvetch. It's a kvetch, but it's a minor one. It's not, you know, the end of the world by any means. Now, what you know, this page says, hey, so what's next? And it talks about the starter set, you know, which is a box set. They point people there: the Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, Dungeon Master's Guide, etc. You know, in August, when the Player's Handbook, the hard copy, starts shipping, there's going to be more free rules provided. So I'm looking forward to seeing that, and we will, you know, come back to things at that point. So in the meantime, that's been sort of a, you know, an intro, overlook, quick look at these rules. It looks like Dungeons and Dragons. It feels like Dungeons and Dragons. I'm looking forward to playing it as soon as I get a chance. You know, do visit the companion post at, oh yeah, there's the guy's binder stuff, at shaneplays.com, you know, for more information, the slideshow and everything. And please, if you found this video helpful at all, please like it and leave me a comment on YouTube, because that helps me a lot. So thanks so much for watching the Shane Plays first look and thoughts at the D&D basic, again, free rules from Wizards of the Coast www.dungeonsanddragons.com. Have a great time. Have a great day. Let your dice do the walking. May they go your way. And remember, for a dragon, you are crunchy and taste good with ketchup.